Greetings, everyone. I want to welcome all of you to this really exciting webcast, and I'm very pleased to have so many of you register and attend. I want to start out by just giving a brief introduction. My name is Peter Young. I'm a member of the Committee 100, which most of you know well, and I'm also chair of this Asian American Career Ceilings Initiative. We've been very pleased that to have had 17, this is the 17th in a series of events that we've held since February of 2020. And they're really aimed at examining the challenges facing Asian Americans in the United States with regard to barriers to advancement in a wide variety of professions. The goal of this initiative has been to contribute to the already significant efforts of organizations and individuals who have been tackling this issue. There are many well-organized organizations such as Ascent or LEAP who've been working on different parts of this problem. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. What we're trying to do is to contribute and to create a convening mechanism and fill in gaps where there are gaps. This event is a fireside chat interview with an Asian American of Indian descent who is the CEO of one of the leading executive search firms. And I am very excited about this event because we're going to do a little blend where we'll learn a little bit about his personal history and how he in his own family life and career dealt with this career ceiling problem. But he also will talk about the role that Heidrick Struggles plays as it's involved in the selection of senior executives and board members in a wide variety of companies, governmental and nonprofit organizations. He really has a unique perspective, which I think is, to me, very exciting in terms of both understanding, experiencing, and solving the Asian American career ceilings problem. Now, we all know that Asian Americans have been underrepresented historically. And although we made some progress over time, there's still a very significant gap that has not been closed. It seems at this point, Asian Americans don't have any problem getting into good schools, but as they rise up and hit the middle management ranks in different types of organizations, not just businesses, there seems to be almost a stalling of the process for a whole variety of reasons. The 16 previous webcasts that we've had have looked at this problem from all different angles. We've had researchers from Columbia, MIT, UC Berkeley talk about the research they do. We've had people who have been in different industry segments talk about the special problems in their industry and what they did to overcome them. And we've had sessions on women in corporations, because not only is it hard to be an Asian American, but it's particularly difficult to be an Asian American woman rising up in corporations. This is going to be a 1-hour session. We're going to start talking a little bit about Krishnan's personal history, and then we'll shift into his own view of what are the drivers and what are the solutions. And then we'll end with a discussion of what Heidrick Struggles has been doing to try to solve this problem with its clients, but also within its own organization. So the last thing I'd like to say is that before I introduce our speaker, is that we're going to have a 10-minute Q&A session at the end. And the way that you ask questions is just use the chat function. And both Krishnan and I will be able to see the questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer as many of them as possible. So briefly, Krishnan Rajagopalan is the president and CEO of Heidrick Struggles. It's a household name. It's a global leader in leadership advisory. And although a lot of people think of it as an executive search firm, the reality is they go deeply into leadership assessment, development, organizational and team effectiveness, in culture shaping services, all of which are aimed towards how to make organizations more effective and more successful. He's had 18 years of experience in executive search. He's led many C-suite and board level searches for global corporations across many industries, as well as giving advice along different dimensions, whether it's leadership, digital transformation, succession planning, et cetera. And he led the Global Executive Search Division, and he also led the Global Technology and Services practice. And, having talked to him about his own experiences and what he's done, there's no question that he is a strong advocate for diversity and inclusion and gender parity, both for his firm's employees, but also for his clients. And what I thought was rather extraordinary is what I learned that Heidrick Struggles recently pledged that on an annual basis, that at least half of the board candidates that were presented to clients over the course of the year would be diverse. And that's pretty extraordinary because it's their own initiative aimed at their client base. So with that, what I'd like to do is welcome Krishnan. And, I'd like to start out because one of the things is you've lived this whole process personally. And maybe we could start out and talk about where you grew up, where you were born and grew up. And I mean, you're an immigrant and you're a classic American story. So maybe you could start out, talk about your early years and how you came to the U.S.
Great, Peter. Thank you for hosting. It's good to be here with you. And I can't see the audience, so thank you those who have joined so far, and look forward to a nice conversation as well. Look, I grew up in India. Grew up in Chennai. I was born in Chennai, actually. Lived in Delhi for a while, and then when I was young, we came to the U.S. To Washington D.C., which is actually my home now.
You came there for the weather, right?
Right. Well, my father, it's interesting. My father was an engineer. Okay, so not surprising. Working for the government on something pretty critical, actually, water supply, which is one of those things that really bridges the great divides of the world, and helps so many people. And he got a job with the World Bank as an engineer, working in those days with water supply, and kind of that also linked to public health. So that's why we came here. He helped build dams, et cetera, things like that. So my sisters, my mother, myself, we all came here. We lived in a small apartment. I remember for so long. We never had a car. We kind of used to take this little push cart and go grocery shopping. Really grew up in that context, and it really, at least the background of my parents and how we were immigrants here shaped quite a bit of my future as well.
Yeah, and I guess it was somewhat serendipitous that your father ended up in DC and working for the World Bank, right? I mean, his career could have gone many different directions, right?
Yeah, it could have gone so many different ways, and in many ways, I think that some of the parallels of immigrants and Asian Americans is, as we came here, the mantra really for us was education, 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 right? I mean, so this was really the ticket. So for us, so this was the path, and it was interesting in our family. It was so important that the expectation was that you got multiple degrees. Okay, just stopping with even one would probably not be sufficient. So there was a heavy push on studying. So the options, be an engineer or be a doctor. I don't know if that sounds familiar to many. I know it does to you, Peter.
Yeah, no, we share the same pressure from parents.
Yeah, so that was a bit of the pressure, but I'd say a bit more of the aspiration for us as well. Is how I always viewed it as well. That these were recognized things. These are the only things that, besides my father being an engineer at the bank, that we really, if I thought about our home environment, that we knew other Asian Americans, they were doctors or they were engineers. I mean, we didn't know much else. I didn't know a lawyer who was an Asian American at that stage. So, and this got double reinforced for me, really, because I used to spend 3 months every other summer back in India with my grandparents. And So living in sort of a dual world and learning from them, they would also be like, okay, study, and try to become a doctor or an engineer. So I took so those were all the commonalities I would say that I probably share with a lot of Asian Americans. I think there are probably some differences in my background as well that I was quite fortunate on as well.
But your father, he has, I find really interesting about his background, because he could have just stopped being an engineer and focused on being an engineer and a great engineer. But he ended up actually moving up in the ranks at the World Bank and so forth. I mean, what is it about his own, because in a sense, he was breaking his way through the career ceiling himself, right, in his generation. So what do you think is it about him that caused him to be able to do that? Because the World Bank I know the World Bank, and it's not easy to rise up in those ranks, right?
Absolutely. Look, I think that that was a difference, being able to see him do that. I think it influenced my view on possibilities in life as well. So he went from being an engineer to an executive over there. I mean, it took 30 years, long period of time to focus, but you could steadily see this, and you could really see his broader skill sets that he brought to the table in communications, in being able to look at a broad set of problems and articulate about them. I mean, he was always great at communication, but he was able to leverage that the bank. And look, he worked so hard. I only remember waking up and seeing him at the table in those days with a big stack of papers, trying to go read through it and assimilate all the information that was required. But he also taught me a lot of other stuff. I mean, he was a very values-driven person, and he would go to work in a it's interesting. He'd go to work in a nice suit, okay, tailored suit, and then he would come home and he'd immediately go into his Indian garb, okay, dhoti, etc., things like that, and he'd be comfortable. So the values were the same, but he kind of lived his life as well the way he wanted to, and didn't try to necessarily fit in. I was kind of lucky, I think, in that he had a job at the bank, because it allowed me to maybe take for granted the diverse international environment of the World Bank. Okay, so everybody had a different last name. Okay, so they were from a different country. It was valued to be different, and it was okay. And so, in a strange way, I kind of thought that was normal almost, and kind of entered the world with that positive mindset almost on that, and then you learn along the way.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I was born in DC and ultimately moved to Japan and then Hawaii and then came back for college. But when I was in DC, we lived in Maryland, and my experience was a little bit different. My father was a professor, but my experience was a little different in the sense that the three kids, my two sisters and I, we were the only Asians in our school. So we didn't feel discriminated because they just thought we were aliens from space, right? So they just thought we were an oddity. So we never got discriminated against. But on the other hand, everyone in the school was not Asian for sure, right? Yeah. But tell me then what did you end up doing? Because I know then you went to school, and I think your career went in a couple of different ways, right?
Yeah, my career, yes. I'm the obvious person to be CEO of a leadership advisory firm, if you listen to my background. So I actually have a master's in electrical engineering, and my first job out of college was to work on satellite communication systems down in Florida. So electrical engineering, I'll be kind in saying the old world for computer science, okay? But that's what I did, and I matriculated from there to business school, wanted to do something different, and discovered the world of management consulting, which I did for 15 years before joining Heidrick as a consultant. And then, as you described, sort of have had over the last 20 years, a fantastic experience here, working on what I consider to be some of the most meaty issues that we can help companies with, human capital problems that they've got.
Well, one of the things I know we chat a little bit about sort of your experiences and transitions and so forth. And the one thing that I found rather interesting is that you overcame what is a huge problem that most Asian Americans have, which is the lack of a mentor, by creating your own system of network and mentoring, which I think actually I'd like you to talk about because it's a good lesson for the people who are attending, which is you don't have to just wait for someone above you to decide they like you and want to help you. You can actually, I guess, create your own network and your own mentor program that might actually do the trick. And I think in your case, it was very helpful to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, throughout my career, I've been fortunate to engage with people and try to ask them for advice. Like, I learned early. My first job as an engineer, by the way, I got assigned a project and I had a technician who was helping. Okay, so here I was, I had 2 degrees. He had no degrees, actually. He'd been there for 25 years. I was brand new. I'm supposed to design something. And I'm telling you that without his help, I could have done nothing. Okay. It was a humbling experience to be like that and to learn from somebody as well. So it always taught me just engaging and learning from others and reaching out was a very positive thing to do. So I did that my whole life, and that virtuous circle always came back to help me. I even did it as a CEO. Okay. When I became CEO, I kind of created my own little board of advisors that had been my clients before and people that I had met, and kind of asked them a whole series of questions on how to advance my thinking, my career, what issues I would face, etc. So I've kind of applied that principle throughout in terms of thinking about my career, in reaching out to others and being able to ask them a series of questions and leveraging other people to provide me with the counsel. I mean, I think you have to be humble on that.
Yeah, and I think that one lesson, I guess, from listening to what you say is a lot of people fall into the mistake of thinking that the only good relationships are above them, right? In other words, I'll just impress a bunch of people above. But the interesting thing about your career throughout was a lot of the help that you got in your career came from people below and to the side and other who weren't direct reports or you didn't report to. And I think in any organization, regardless of size, that's actually an important observation.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the key things is, focus on that job that you've got and making those around you and you successful. Okay. And don't focus on the job 2 or 3 jobs ahead of you too much. So I think I've applied that principle pretty ruthlessly throughout my career, and therefore you start creating circles and waves of support and people that you help because you're all on the same page and you're trying to do the same thing, and you're not trying to promote yourself too aggressively or anything like that. So I always think about the current job that I've got, and being successful in that as well.
Now, you did very well in all phases of your career, but did you face any impediments along the way because you were Asian American that you can recall? And if you did, how did you deal with those impediments?
Yeah, we're going to date ourselves here with this conversation a bit because the world changes, right? I mean,
Right.
Those things which I probably thought were impediments way back then, aren't impediments in today's world. Okay, we're surrounded in a different world. But look, I could start with simply the length of my last name used to be like one of the things that you could get angry about because people are always mispronouncing it. Okay, and you could take that the wrong way, or you could kind of realize that it's just a difficulty and a challenge, and people are learning. Okay, so I mean those could be flashpoints for a lot of people on going the wrong way on a conversation. Okay, and you could view that very, very negative. Religion could be another topic. I'm a Hindu. Okay,
Mhm.
in the 70s and 80s, most people thought Hare Krishna and other things like that. So, it's just people learning as well. I'm a strict vegetarian. Okay.
Yeah.
Again, trying to make it in the workforce in the 70s and 80s. And, that was like a rarity. Okay. The toughest thing I probably faced actually was in my first job, believe it or not, of direct, maybe racism, where there I was 23 years old, and we were going to a field event, sort of like a picnic, and one of the engineers jokingly said, "Hey, get to the back of the bus." Okay. And by the way, in those days, I was the only person of color who was an engineer. I'm like, so fortunately, somebody put their arm around me and said, "Hey, come sit with me." And you realize that hey, that was an individual and not a culture. So look, you face all these things, and you just try to be straightforward, live to your values. I think speak up against things at the appropriate times, recognize whether that's an individual or a culture. Okay. And when it's a culture, run away, is my view. Okay. If it's an individual, you kind of see your way through it. So you have to battle through all of these things through most of your life. And as long as you're even keel on these things, and there are stereotypes, et cetera, things like that. But look, I'm a values driven person, and I kind of stand up for exactly who I am, and I don't try to change those things. As I said, I started off with a viewpoint that diversity was good. Okay. So I wasn't really trying to narrowly fit in. I was trying to be myself.
Yeah. It is really interesting though, because, in terms of your choice of careers, it isn't always obvious that you chose the easy route, right? I mean, executive search is not famous for necessarily being, wildly diverse, right? And yet you did. So I guess you just sort of said, I'm going to do what I feel I really love to do, and I'll make it work.
Yeah, I mean, look, I realized when I was in consulting that the who mattered more than the what. I mean, the what was incredibly important, okay? The answer to the problem, but I found that as I cataloged things that, wow, people make the change. So I really wanted to focus on people.
Right.
And I said, this is an opportunity to do that. I saw it as an opportunity for a person of color to have an impact. I hadn't met everybody in the industry who looked like me. So that was a bit of a leap for me to make, but I kind of felt I could have an impact, and I wanted to, and I said, okay, let's give it a shot. And there was some risks that you take along the way.
Yeah, no, that's right. Now, let's switch a little bit to the big picture and Heidrick. Now, as a senior member and now head of a leading executive search firm, I think you have a very unique perspective that others don't have across so many different companies in terms of senior management and boards. So from that perspective, right, what do you think are some of the impediments that you see across many different industries and companies that Asian Americans should be aware of, that they're going to have to deal with?
Yeah, great. So look, I mean, these are generalities and they don't always fit. So let me just start off by acknowledging that. Look, there are some stereotypes that often can exist in people's minds, and the people that you're interviewing with or speaking with, and Asians are very smart. Okay, they're not good leaders. You don't see the representation widely in areas, marketing as an example, sales, maybe those types of things. So there can be all kinds of different impressions that are out there. And I think that one of the biggest things that I see, maybe advice I might give here actually on those dimensions is, what I see, and broadly speaking, Asian Americans now, is we're already recognized sort of for being smart, and we still go to interviews trying to prove we're smart.
Right.
Okay. I mean, it's just like to me, when I hear feedback from a client and they typically start like, wow, that's a really smart person, I'm like shaking my head a little bit. Okay. Because the person that they meet and they say, I'd really like to work with that person, they're going to get the job.
Right.
Okay. So we over index a bit on that, and we should remember about leadership skills, soft skills, kind of wanting to be able to display that side of us, which sometimes can be uncomfortable, but being able to, remember the objective is for them to like you actually, okay? That matters, okay? People don't realize that, or in the moment they lose that, okay? But at the end of the day, that counts for an awful lot. And I just think that gets lost in the narrative. But we have to remember that there's all these preconceived notions, but at the end of the day, what wins the game, and how to think about that.
Yeah. And, it's interesting, whether you're a CEO or you're head of a small group or a division or whatever, your leadership skills can make a big difference. I just enjoyed recently reading a great article about the CEO of Microsoft, Nadella, right? And it was about how he changed the culture at Microsoft. And Microsoft, it was, very siloed and this and that and aggressive. And he just said, I want an environment where people are kind to each other and they listen to each other and they reach out to each other instead of first speaking. And he changed the culture, right? And it's, at least a lot of people who are at Microsoft feel that's one of the reasons why they've been successful, which is ability to not necessarily say, we're going to, do it this way and combative and so forth. So I think whether you're at the CEO level or you're just running a small unit, you can make a big difference, which I think in part is your own philosophy, right? Which is, how do you change the dynamic of how people relate to each other?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that ultimately leaders who can do that. Satya Nadella is he's like an uber example. Okay, so exemplar. But I think for anybody, that's what you look for. You look for the ability to influence, the ability to have a point of view, so have some courage, okay, and conviction to their values and being able to drive something. And I think ultimately those are the people that succeed. The bar on just being brilliant to succeed is just like so high, actually, okay, that it becomes even more challenging. And those of us realize we're successful along the way that I can't compete on that dimension, okay? There are too many people who are far more brilliant than me, but I might be able to compete and actually be good on some other dimensions. And I start working on those skills.
Well, my wife and I were at a gala dinner, and there was an inscribed picture of Einstein with one of his sayings, and I loved it. It said, "The difference between stupidity and genius is their limits of genius," right? We bid on that photograph for the thing. We got outbid by a dentist. I don't know what happened. And I guess it's sitting in his dental office right now. So now leadership, of course, is a big part of what you focused on at Heidrick. What can you say about the ways in which leaders can impact the development of those people coming behind them, and particularly those who are Asian American or some other less representative, ethnicity?
Yep. Summary word I'd use is engage. Okay. I think, many kind of try to figure out, should I engage? Should I not engage? Is it going to be viewed positively or not? At the end of the day, I think engage. Okay. Proactively reach out, bring along other Asian Americans rather than doing it reactively is what I would say. I would say, mentor, and there's a difference between mentoring and sponsoring. Okay. Being a sponsor is more powerful actually than being a mentor. It's like you put a call on somebody's behalf proactively to say, hey, I heard about this job. I heard about something going on here. I think this person would be amazing for it. Okay. And when you do those small little things and you're credible, you're a leader, they have an amazing impact as well. And take that responsibility to be able to do that. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that people can be doing is engaging, advocating, and it's okay to do that. You realize, I'll give you a couple of examples here. You realize that groups have special issues and topics that are definitely worthwhile investing in and advocating for. We created a Advancing Women's Excellence group inside of Heidrick because we realized that there were some issues that we were having. Probably one of the best things we did. Okay. because that group's able to really advocate for each other, talk about it. We built a whole sponsorship group on top of that that exists inside the firm, and it's been terrific for us at Heidrick. But it goes to show you that groups like that need the special attention as well, okay? And that's okay. It's good, as opposed to, I'm giving special attention here, I'm not over here. You can always, as a leader, kind of feel that conflict, but it's a good.
Right. Well, it's really a challenge if you're involved in management or organization, because even if your goal is, in fact, to create an equitable path for, say, Asian Americans or another ethnic group, everything you do comes with something that goes with it, right? Unintended or intended consequences. Affirmative action, for example, is a plus, but then it creates resentment, on the part of the people who are not part of that ethnic group and so forth. So how should organizations, particularly companies and because you serve not just companies, you serve nonprofits and,
Yep.
and so forth, and government, how do they make that trade-off? Because a lot of the programs that people put in place, they also have something negative that comes with it too, right?
Yeah, but I think it's sort of where we're moving to is a recognition that diversity and inclusion is whether it's a nonprofit or a business, that it is a benefit, that it drives better performance. It's good for the company. So, and it's good for the people. Okay, so it's good for all the stakeholders. So that realization between studies companies have done and people's practical experience is coming to fruition. So I think at the end of the day, companies are more and more beginning to think like that, and they know it needs to be driven from the top of the organization as well. It needs to be systematic. It needs to have metrics. It needs to have investment. Okay, you're not going to get to, climate change goals without investing in that. You're not going to get to these goals without investing in these topic areas as well. Okay, so it comes with great benefit, but you have to invest, you have to put it into your budget. And people are beginning to think about that very differently, I think, which is what's going to drive the change that's going to be required. It is a journey, okay? That's, it just gets reinforced over and over as we look at the numbers, that it takes a while. That's we have to have patience with it as well, because these are people created problems, okay, and people created solutions, and all of those take a little bit of time. Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the environment, and a similar issue that companies are dealing with is ESG, right? ESG, on this environmental, social, and diversity. It's a broader topic. And what's interesting, though, is I think you put your finger on it, which is there has to be fundamentally a belief that it's not just a win-lose, right. And I think people come around to understanding that diversity, in fact, does have business benefits and organizational benefits. I mean, this country would not be where it is if we didn't have the immigrants, right? Without the immigrants that came to this country, whether it's the first wave of Germans and Irish, whatever, this country would never have succeeded. And so there's a recognition of that. And that's the same thing, ESG. The CEOs are getting their mind around saying, something, maybe the company on many dimensions are better off. And I think they're feeling that way about diversity.
Yeah, no. I think that, there's the whole conversation around stakeholders. Okay. So this is a win-win. It's great for your shareholder. It's great for your community. It's great for your employees. Okay. And people are beginning to see that all of this comes together. And that's how people are beginning to lean in. There will be skeptics, but there are more metrics on this, and there are more studies, and I generally look, our statistics and the corporate emphasis that we feel on it is very real. Okay, is what I would say in terms of where corporate America is at least leaning in and what they're asking from Heidrick and Struggles on this topic.
Yeah. By the way, you have kids, and I have a son. Tell me, how did you deal with raising them and helping them succeed? And were you like your father, in some of the advice you gave, or I hope you didn't tell them, please be a doctor or a scientist or an engineer.
No, I mean, look, we were the first generation here in different stage, different time, different pressures. Unlike my parents, we weren't sending money back to India. Okay, so life is different. You're at a different phase, and we're blessed and fortunate on that. So my philosophy has always been figure out what they're passionate about and almost overinvest. Okay, into that to see if they're really passionate or not, and allow them to be their best in those areas. So that's been our philosophy regarding our kids, and they're on different paths, and sometimes those investments are exactly what spurred them to the next level of interest. And sometimes, they realize pretty quickly, okay, I'm not going to be world class in that, or I'm not going to be competitive in that, so I'm going to do something else as well. So realizing what you're not going to do is as important as realizing what you're going to do as well. So we never told our kids, be a doctor, be an engineer. We just kind of said, hey, try to find your passion.
Yeah. Well, my father and mother were traditional old-fashioned Chinese parents, and they went at it, saying you got to be doctor or professor for like a long time. And in fact, I think I told you the story that they wouldn't talk to me for a while because I decided to go to Yale instead of MIT, which, MIT to them was like the cathedral, right? So forth. But I finally came around and realized that at the end of the day, what I was interested wasn't bad. It wasn't, unethical, and they should support. And we were the same way, like you, with your children, with our son, same thing. We said, what is it that you really love to do? And we want to enable you to get there. And maybe the things to be successful in the profession that you want are very different from ours, but we're going to try to help you, right? And I think that is, at least not the only way, but it's one way, right, to really help the next generation succeed and not hate you, right?
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah. What advice would you give to, now a lot of the people in the audience here are at different phases of their career, some already successful, some in the middle. What advice would you give to those who are starting out or in the middle stage of their career in industry in terms of, succeeding and getting up the ladder, right?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I guess, my experience would lead me to kind of say, look, seek some roles inside of, you probably have some areas that you're working in, industries, et cetera, but, take on different business leadership experiences. If you want to be a leader, okay, there's an assumption here that we're talking about leadership types of roles, cross-functional, multifunctional experience, I think is good, particularly at those stages of life, to be able to learn about that. So go and do that. Work on just not only your technical skills, but your leadership skills. Embrace who you are and what makes you you. Okay, and that's really important. Okay, to understand that about yourself as well. Find the people that you want to emulate. Okay, you got to maybe go find those people a bit, and they don't have to be Asian. They don't have to, exactly look like you, but look at their values and what do they represent, and then ask them to sponsor you as well. So I think, look, you have to manage your career. You have to be proactive is the way I'd like to say about your career. And the person who's in charge of your career is you. So take some ownership for that, and be a little bit vocal as well. So there's nothing wrong with that as long as you do it the right way.
Yeah, no, I strongly believe in, I think the point you made about you have to know yourself and you have to be objective about yourself. And I think that's before you even think about what career you want and so forth. You really have to be honest about yourself, and you have to surround yourself with some friends who are willing to be honest and tell you, well, you may think you're really good at blank, but you're really not, but in a nice way, so that you don't go down a path where you're never going to succeed because it's not a good match, right?
Yeah, and that's, look, I probably get calls and talk to people who are pretty senior level people, maybe not CEOs, but a couple notches down, and they say, I want to pivot from my career to this thing over here, something else different. I want to do something different, is what they say. And I'm like, why are you going to be good at different?
Mhm.
And they just stop and they go, okay, let me think about that. I said, why are you going to be good at different? Why are you going to be competitive at different? Why will you win at different? And what will make you happy? Will losing make you happy? Or is being successful part of happiness? You know, well, what is it for you? So you ask them a bunch of these hard questions, and there's some aha moments for people as well. But almost everybody sort of starts off thinking the grass is way greener on the other side.
Yeah, and sometimes people don't understand what the problem is, as opposed to, I mean, I give an example. I mentor a lot of folks, and I gave some advice to this Asian American male who had been, now it was third large investment bank, and he was really unhappy. And each time, he was skilled, but he was unhappy. And he said, now I'm going to go do something totally different. And I sat to him and I said, well, what is it that is the problem for all three? And we talked about it, and we realized the problem was that he was at a large company with lots of politics and he hated politics. So I said, your solution is not to go into some other profession, consulting. Your solution is to go to a smaller boutique where politics are not key. But he was staring in the face. He just never realized that was the problem, right? But the same thing, you ought to choose wisely and figure out where the real problem is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Heidrick Struggles takes this issue of diversity in management board rates very seriously and committed to doing its part to make sure that industry, government, nonprofits make progress with regard to this career ceiling, glass ceiling problem. Tell me what some of the initiatives that Heidrick Struggles has done, some internally, but also externally. I mean, I think you're doing some things that normally companies wouldn't necessarily say, oh, this is something, we're responsible for changing, right?
Yeah. So look, Heidrick, I'm proud to be part of this organization for 20 years. It's always talked about diversity and inclusion. And I think 5-6 years ago, we kind of really stepped it up. Okay. And what we did was we created a pledge, okay, first in 2018, in fact, okay, and we basically said it's our board diversity pledge to help boards accelerate their progress. We basically, as you mentioned before, we said that we would present only fully diverse slates in aggregate over the year, and we would measure ourselves. So we measure ourselves annually on that. We're at 67% last year, okay, so we feel really good about the slates that we're presenting. And in fact, in the US, our placement rate on diversity is over 60% right now. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we kind of took the same approach that if you can't measure it and we can't talk about it, we're not going to change it. And we did that not only with board searches, we kind of went down into all of our searches. Mm-hmm. And we said, okay, we want to do that. And we started measuring it. And we have seen measurement, discussion, conversation, drive change. And our results in the US right now, over 51% of all of our placements in the US are diverse, okay? Yeah. So it was standing at about 35 to 40% before, okay? And we've moved the dial on this. So we have a DE&I practice that we've stood up, which works with clients on a wide range of issues, but we apply that same methodology and process to Heidrick as well, okay? Mm-hmm. So that, because we know that having a culture of inclusion is really critical to helping us do this. As I mentioned, we've created groups inside that we never had before and put budget associated with that to align the interests and to sponsor and to help people kind of, just have a place to go to have the right conversations. We've got ERG groups and we've got groups like this Advancing Women's Excellence that we formed. We've got a similar one for African Americans now. So we're just going right through and making sure we invest appropriately and we spend our time, talking about the set of issues that we bring forward our metrics visible to the firm as well, for people to be proud of it as well, okay? And be able to drive our performance that way. And we've applied that lens to our recruiting efforts. we've got a ways to go on that still. But in terms of recruiting and making sure we've got a diverse talent pool as well. So we're trying to double down on this and on all the angles possible.
You know, if you look across companies, there are obviously a wide variety of cultures and philosophies across companies. There's some that, you know, have been embracing diversity, and others, shall we say, are, you know, not as enlightened. Do you get pushback at all from any companies with regard to, you say, well, why are you showing me so many, you know, Asian Americans or whatever it is in the work that you've done?
No, we don't get that pushback, but I think there is I think there may be selection bias still happening. Okay,
Right.
So we haven't been able to, you know, solve that problem, and we're trying to step up to solve that problem and coaching ourselves on, okay, when that happens, what's the conversation Heidrick consultants should be having? Okay,
Right.
how do we advance? Well, so we think there is a problem there. Okay, to be clear. Okay, I don't think we've cracked the nut on it, so we're trying to educate ourselves to say, okay, how do our best people advance the ball in this case, and how do we train the rest of the firm? We're actually working, like for example, with NASDAQ now, just in a partnership really to help them engage on DE&I so they can talk to their clients about it. Okay, it's as simple as that. We want to advance, you know, work with them in the marketplace on some really cool things that they're doing, the pledges that they've made, the initiatives that they're saying, and they need help. So we're kind of giving them our intellectual capital and training and trying to help them as well.
Yeah, and although it's helpful that the CEO is a woman, right? And
yeah, it's terrific, Adina.
Yeah, no, she's terrific. You know, she's really terrific. But it helps, right? Because, you know, things come from the top. So you know, obviously, things are changing, and I guess will these changes in industry, do you think they're going to create, on the positive side, new opportunities for Asian Americans? I mean, certainly, as just one example, because so much growth was in China and Asia, that clearly helped a lot of Chinese Americans and Asian Americans because they had a special either cultural or language skill, and companies needed help in terms of building up their business in China, for example, as an example. There's an example where change in industry really helped, right? You know, Asian Americans. Can you think of things that are happening that maybe are creating good opportunities that otherwise didn't exist?
Yeah, I mean, I look, so I think that the domestic opportunities, because the demographics of the US are changing. Okay, so we're talking about language skills that I don't think it's going to be around the language skills. It's going to be around the culture and the target communities, and what does the landscape of the US look like. And I think that in itself, just natural progression wise. I mean, look, as an Indian American coming here back in the late 60s to today, it's a different world, okay? You know, in terms of serving that community, how big the diaspora is, et cetera. So I think the opportunities that will get created for the Asian American community just multiply simply as a result of the diaspora that exists in the US itself. So I'm optimistic on that, and that's the representative population that you have to be able to resonate with as well. So that's your target audience, if you ask me.
Now we have a couple of questions to the audience, and I encourage the audience to type in questions. The first one is from Buck G, who I know is a friend of mine who is a member of Committee 100. Has the NASDAQ board diversity rule been effective in changing board recruiting? And Krishnan, you might explain to the, not everyone in the audience may know what this NASDAQ board diversity rule is, but if you could define it and then comment.
Yeah. It's a rule that they put in place that sort of says that every new company that lists needs to have diversity on their boards, and they try to, you know, depending on the size of the board, they try to say, here's how many diverse members you need to have on the board. So it's a new rule, okay? So again, new journey, and they're implementing it, okay? as far as I can tell. So I think and new companies that are beginning to list, okay, and think about this, they're all getting educated on it. So I don't think that it's easy to say that it's changed all of board recruiting or anything yet. We're at the very early stages. We're sort of working with them on simply education and training, okay, so that people understand what this means and how to think about it. So there's a long ways to go.
Yeah, and how are they implementing it? Are they reaching out to the individual companies and trying to encourage? I mean, what's the mechanism of that change?
Yeah, no, the mechanism is, look, I think I can't speak to NASDAQ since we're not a part of it, but the way they deal with companies, they've got sales representatives, et cetera, who are helping companies list. So you can't list there unless your board complies. But before you get to that stage, companies go through a big process to list. So they're trying to educate them very early in their process of forming boards, et cetera, things like that. That's where we might get engaged with them to provide them education and training materials on that topic.
Yeah. Now there's one of the questions here is an interesting question. I know, Krishnan, you and I chat about this. Barry Chen says, how have Indian Americans been so successful in corporate America, e.g. Google, Microsoft, Uber, ?
Yeah, I think you had a panel, didn't you, Peter, before on who actually studied the analytics of this, and I think there's some conclusions that you could draw from that. But Barry, I think it's perhaps there. I think some of it is driven by maybe a stronger recognition or earlier recognition on kind of this topic of working on their leadership skills, okay, as well. I think sort of the language of we maybe is embedded a little bit more, okay. So they're talking about bringing teams forward and how teams succeed. So I think that creates a stronger leadership profile and aura as well. So Peter, you may be able to comment based on.
Yeah, Krishnan referenced a previous webcast we had where we had Professor Morris, who is at Columbia Business School, and Jackson Liu at the MIT Sloan School, and they jointly did about 8 studies, and they had a terrific panel where they talked about what they learned from the studies about why Asian Americans have difficulty, but also one of their conclusions was that Indian Americans not only do better than other, East Asian, et cetera, but they actually do better than on a proportional basis to, to Caucasians, et cetera. And they explain what the reasons were. And it's very interesting. And by the way, all of these sessions are recorded. And so if you want to go back, we have recordings available of that session, but they really figured out why Indian Americans were so successful, and the results were surprising. It wasn't necessarily because they look more white, because they don't, right? And it wasn't because and they went through, but it was a certain kind of aggressiveness that was their conclusion, so it was interesting, right? So there's a question about, can you talk, there was a recent report about, here it says, a recent report about how careers are going to be much longer in the future, and that companies, employers ought to design careers so that the working professionals in their 40s with small children in their 50s taking care of their elders aren't quite so busy at work. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this is, I'm just reading it as well here.
It's a long question.
Yeah, I think we're all, really trying to figure this out with how do you create work-life flexibility in jobs, and what does the future of work really begin to look like, right? And I haven't seen that study to be able to comment, but I think that, I think on behalf of what we're trying to do at Heidrick here, we're trying to be as flexible as we can and learn on this topic. I mean, the way we're treating sort of this balance and sort of coming back to work, at least, and thinking about it is not mandating some things, but having a framework that we can operate under, and people can have ultimately some flexibility to operate inside of a framework, which is how we're thinking about it for our workers, our people. And we've surveyed them to try to understand who they are and kind of get a sense of what their sets of issues are. And we think sort of having a strategic approach to it and then allowing people to flex inside there is the best answer for us.
Yeah. And you see these things, I think a lot of people think that some of these changes are going to be permanent. They're not just temporary because of the pandemic, that it's going to change a lot of the way people work and how they get promoted. Do you feel that way?
I think everything is still changing. I think we are learning. If you look at promotion as a thing, I don't think we've been this long enough. I think we've been in it long enough to promote people. We haven't been in this long enough to know who will have successful careers yet. Okay, and I think those are vastly different things to be able to predict inside of changing of how we work. Okay, so we're trying to figure that out ourselves. Okay, so our promotions have been fantastic, but we haven't had a class that started out as an associate yet and became partner through this process. So that takes multiple years to happen. So we need to figure that out.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we have a number of questions here, but some of which I don't know how to answer. Like someone says, how does one figure out your passion and calling? And I don't have an answer to that, but it's an interesting question because it's certainly germane.
Well, I mean, look, the only part I'd say is like, in general, I found people who enjoy things that they've got passion in calling it. So you got to ask yourself, am I having fun doing it? And do I look forward to doing it every day? And is it something that I just get excited about? I mean, so, and then they have to be good. Usually, if you kind of feel like you want to do that, but you're not good at it, pretty soon it falls out of your passion list, okay? You know, this positive reinforcement and feedback is a very important thing that we shouldn't forget.
Yeah, that's right. Well, look, we're at the end of, I think we hit the main questions that could be discussed. I want to thank Krishnan for really taking the time to share his perspective on things. You know, there are a lot of lessons to learn from both your own personal history, but also how you've, you know, how Heidrick is trying to have an impact. And I know a number of senior people at Heidrick involved with the process you're talking about, and they're very passionate about it, and they're doing a great job. And it's important because if companies like Heidrick aren't taking a lead and so forth, we won't get there. We just won't get there, right?
Yeah. Look, we've got a platform and an opportunity to make a difference, and we're very, very committed to doing that. Yeah. So now, Peter, thank you so much for hosting me as well.
One of the important questions there is this recorded and can we replay? And the answer is yes, it's recorded. And for those of you who would like to binge watch Krishnan talking about his personal life, you're going to have the opportunity, just like Netflix. And I just want to end by saying we have some very interesting programs coming up. One, we're pivoting, by the way, to action-oriented activities. So we're shifting now half of this, you know, Committee 100 Asian American Career Ceilings Initiative. It's going to shift now half its energy towards having an impact, because we've done a great job, I think, of explaining the problem, giving advice. So we're going to be doing that, and around some of the ideas that came out of a conference we had last July, where we had 25 actionable items. So first of all, there is putting together a resource where all of a directory of all organizations that touch on this issue are in there, all the recordings and all events that are coming up, so that there's a common resource, that this is a collaborative thing. We're going to have some initiatives to try to expand what is being done in California, which is a program that trains Asian Americans on how to run for office and then how to be effective once you're in office. And we're going to try to find ways to expand that beyond, beyond California, and maybe Heidrick can be helpful in that. So there are things we're going to do, but half is going to be focused on making things happen. Because at the end of the day, you can talk all day long, and that's helpful. But at the end of the day, you've got to make things happen. And for those of you who are on, who want to be involved, please, email us and let us know, because we would love to have your involvement as well. So thank you very much, Krishnan. It's fascinating, and I really appreciate your time. And thank you to everyone in the audience. And I hope you found this very helpful.
Thank you, Peter, for hosting me.